You can take a break in a minute.
Go inland to Hampton. Have you ever been to Hampton?
Your attention, please.
My name's Sandy Dvore, and I was asked to, no, it's loud enough.
Don't be shy.
Come on, you're in the side
I was
song.
asked
Right next to you.
to give a talk, and I thought if you guys agreed, if anybody wanted to do a question and answer. All my work was done mostly entertainment and in the Hollywood thing since the 60s. And so if that brings if that's interesting to anybody, would you rather just have me tell you dirty stories about
Yes. Tell about the Steve McQueen story. Maybe not. Maybe not the first story. Maybe not the first story.
What would you prefer? What would you love?
Start with the UA logo. How you were playing with the paperclip and how that came about. I thought that was interesting. No?
No, something dirtier.
Would you like to sit here?
No. The thing about art is it's not interesting to talk about. It's only interesting to do. You have to sit and do it. If anybody is interested in the experiences that went along with it, that might be interesting. I knew all these people, you know, and they were all quirky, and there's a lot about them. So anybody who's interested in asking me anything.
Who was the most interesting character
that I ever worked with? The most interesting character was Otto Preminger.
Wow.
Yeah. Otto Preminger was one of my favorite people and one of the few people who actually became a lifelong friend. And I have a good story on Preminger. When he signed me to do his first picture that I worked with him on, he had had a fight with Saul Bass. You know who Saul Bass was? He was the great designer, great American designer who designed Man with the Golden Arm, Exodus, all those wonderful openings and everything. And he always worked with Otto Preminger on his pictures, but they had a beef, and I was getting hot at the time, and my name was in the trades, and so he called me in to work on a picture called Skidoo. He wanted to prove to the industry that he could do the new hip stuff. He had the same thing going on inside of him that most people have when they're coming to the end of their, whatever their thing is, and they try to prove that they can still cut it for the present thing. So he did a script called Skidoo, which was, and he brought me in and asked me if I wanted to work with him. And for me, I grew up seeing Laura and Man with the Golden Arm and all these great Preminger films, and I was thrilled to death. And he showed it to me in the screening room, and when I saw it, it had everybody in Hollywood in it. Groucho Marx, and it had Jackie Gleason. I mean, and he just got the young agents to summon everybody, and the picture was terrible. And I felt so bad, but I agreed to do the opening because it was Preminger. And I wanted to do, I wanted to do the feature. So we worked on it, and it was over, and I spent 4 months, and he demanded that I be in the office next to his, not in my office in Beverly Hills, my studio. He wanted me to work on a lot, and I did, and we got to know each other really, really well, and he yelled at people. He had this reputation of yelling and frothing at the mouth and turning red, kicking Frank Sinatra off the set and storming out. He had this wild reputation. But it was all a fake. It was all a performance. He was an actor. He was really a very soft, warm-hearted man. But I had been listening to this yelling and this screaming for 3.5 months, coming from the office next door. The work was finished. I had finished all the special effects. Nilsson and I had done the main titles at the end by singing everything down to MXVILLL. Watch out! It was all the titles were sung. It was a brand new, wonderful idea, and but we weren't finished. But I had had enough. And so I had this office right at the entrance of MGM where the arch is, and the offices were from the old days. They had the big windows where you could open it up in the summertime and actually sit on the windowsill. And I was sitting on the windowsill, and a beautiful, tall, red-headed actress came walking by with her headshot book. She was she looked like Susie Parker, if you remember what she looked like. And she went walking by and she smiled at me. And Preminger was in the other office screaming and firing people and doing crazy, and I just couldn't listen anymore. And so I called the girl over and I asked her if she wanted to get out of there. And she says, yeah, where do you want to go? And so I took the girl. I took the girl home, the actress. I took her home, and at 5:30 at night, I get a telephone call from the studio, and it's Otto Preminger screaming that there's 8 guys from the Title House company sitting and waiting for me for an hour in a meeting, and where am I? And it's unacceptable, and Preminger will not tolerate such a thing, and the phone slams down. And I just had it. I was wrung out to dry. I mean, I drove back to the studio as fast as I could, and I walked into Preminger's office, and he was red, and there was spittle coming out of the corner of his mouth. And I said, Otto, you're right. It was a totally amateur performance. You paid me half of what our deal was. I wasn't here. The guys were waiting for the finishing touches. I forgot about you. I was tired of the yelling. I just couldn't stand it anymore. And a beautiful redhead walked by. And I took her home, and we made love all afternoon, and I never remembered for a second that I had a meeting with you, or this picture, or those 6 assholes from the Pacific Title, or any of it. And that's it. And you don't have to pay me what you owe me. And he looked at me, and he walked up to me, he was this far away, and he looked at me and he says, Dvore, he says, this explanation is the only thing that Preminger would accept. And he hugged me and he kissed me on the cheek, and he said, now let's go in there and take care of these assholes. And we were friends for the rest of his life. I loved him. He's my favorite. He was my favorite.
That was a great question, by the way. Thank you.
Some of the posters, did any of the stars sit for you, or did you work from photographs?
You know who used to like to sit for a little while? It just happened to him. He used to like to sit for a little while. And he used to say to me, he said to me once, he said, I would never tell a creative guy what to do.
The detective?
And in all my years as an artist in the entertainment business, that's the only suggestion coming from a client that I ever did because I was asked to do it. I never did anybody else's ideas because I never wanted to sit in my house depressed looking at somebody else's ideas hanging on my wall, and that would depress me. So I copped an attitude at the very beginning, and I said, well, I'm the guy that you go to when everybody else has screwed you over, and you complain you spent all of your big money on a big mistake. Now could I fix it? So I became the fix-it doctor. But I never once in 30 years ever had to do anybody else's idea or use the color of their white glove. Yeah, boy, you know, you're sitting home and looking at this stuff, you don't want to see some, you know, I remember that asshole telling me I had to do this.
So how did you get connected in the first place? Because there's so many young people who, I mean, a lot of them who try to make some kind of connection with Hollywood and they can't do it.
If I can interject, I always tell students, network, meet people, and I use this story right here, if he's willing to tell it,
well,
as an example.
I got connected because I could play softball. I was playing ball with a bunch of entertainment guys on the weekends because there was an entertainment league. And since I wasn't doing well as an artist, nobody knew out here I was an artist or a commercial artist, or had been one, and was out here because I had been back in Chicago getting fired from all the jobs that I got right out of art school. I wasn't bragging about the fact that, oh, I come from Chicago, I'm an artist, but I've been fired and everything. So I traveled across the country to get away from the embarrassment. I mean, how's that for a neurotic opening to a bunch of new people who are wondering what you're doing? So I was hanging out and parking cars and so forth, and I said I was an out-of-work actor because that was legit. You could say that. You could be an out-of-work actor, and it was actually an occupation. You could go to Schwab's, and you could share coffee and get a second cup because you were as good as Jack Nicholson, and he was getting a free second cup because he wasn't doing anything, so why couldn't I? And so I was playing ball, but one day on a Sunday, there was a girl, there was an actress, a Filipino actor, an American Filipino actress, Barbara Luna, a beautiful girl who had come from Chicago, and she told a young man who was loved by everybody. His name was Guy McElroy. He was a press agent at first, but he had a magic quality. He's a 24-year-old guy, but everybody loved him. Natalie Wood wouldn't make a move without him. Judy Garland wouldn't make a move without calling him. Warren Beatty did everything that he said. He had this ability where people just gravitated towards him. And Barbara Luna said to McElroy, because he was playing a one thing, she said, "What's Sandy Dvore doing here?" I said, "Well, he's an out-of-work actor, but he can play ball." And she said, "Well, he's not an out-of-work actor, he's a great artist." I said, "No, he's not an artist, he's an actor, but he's out, you know, I don't know." And so then she gave him a little background because she knew me from Chicago. So he came up to me and he asked me, he says, "She says you're an artist." And I said, "Yeah, I used to be an artist." You know, the chip weighed about 20 pounds by this time. You know, I got fired from the Roaring 20s parking cars because the guy said I pocketed a 25-cent chip. I mean, I was really, you know, the 2,700-mile trip really wasn't working out. And so he said to me, "If you need any money, or if you're any good at what she says you did, we have clients and we take out ads." Because then Variety reported, the trade papers, every day they came out and the back page had ads because everybody was very proud of what they were doing. Pictures in preparation, movies that were being made. All the agents took out ads. Ads were taken out for people who really didn't need, I mean, Lawrence of Arabia didn't need me to make an ad for him. And James Garner and Wagner to catch a thing. McQueen needed an ad to get a job. But their agents and their reps, it was a sophisticated way of showing what show business was all about. We're stars, and this is what we're doing, and this is... So, long story a little shorter, McElwain asked me if I could, I think, it was, I'm not quite sure if Judy Garland came first or Sammy Davis Jr. came first. But he said, could you draw Sammy Davis Jr.? And I said, you know, very artistically, yeah, I could draw him. You know, I didn't even know if the paper in my trunk of my car had disintegrated. You know, I hadn't opened up the cardboard folders we used to have with the little shoelace things you tie and you carry your life around in it. And so I said I could draw him, and they gave me some photographs of him, and they said he was opening up at the ambassador. They said that this press agent Warren Cowan would send over somebody to give you the copy of the lines. And so I had a week to do it, and I waited till the last night. there isn't an artist or an art student or who doesn't know that that's part of our MO. You procrastinate until you just can't find anything more to do to keep you from failing. So at 11 o'clock at night I started drawing, and I gave it to them. They put it on the back page of the Hollywood Reporter. And this big agent, Freddie Fields, who was the head guy in the business, he and David Beagle ran this outfit called CMA, which is now ICM. And they were the biggest, most powerful agency that represented everybody. And so then I got a call from this McElwain, who everybody loved, said, don't leave town so fast, we got some calls, because we put the ad in the Hollywood Reporter, which I didn't know what that was all about. And a lot of people called, and that led to the next call coming from this Freddie Fields, and he turned Judy Garland over to me for Capitol Records. Congratulations for her concert at Carnegie Hall. And I can't believe I got an exhibit and Judy Garland's not up there. You know, I'll have to take a pill.
Well, thanks for explaining how you got into it.
Well, that's it.
Fascinating.
And so then he gave me, and so then Freddie Fields called me into his office, and he had something I'd never seen before. He had sunglasses that were shaded. They were darker at the top. This was still the years when sunglasses had a white plastic rim around them, and there was a thing. There were sunglasses. You know, he had these sunglasses that looked like they must have cost, you know, and a desk that was made of marble. And remember in the early 60s, those velvet curtains? Everything was red velvet and hanging there. And he said to me, I'll tell you what, kid, this guy was smart. He got it. The guys in Chicago fired me, didn't get it. He got it. And he said, I'll tell you what, I represent everybody who's a heavyweight in the business. I represent Fonda, I represent Liza, I represent her mother, I represent Connery, I represent Sellers, I represent everybody. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy you the back page of the Variety and the Reporter for 1 year. I'm going to give you a list of everybody I represent, and I'm going to have their press agent bring over what they're doing in their life, even if they're just doing nothing. We'll make up something, and you do anything you want on them, and you put it on the back page of the trades, and create any kind of a little logo for CMA that you want, and you send me a bill for whatever you think it's worth. And I won't see it until everybody else in the industry sees it the next morning. So go have a good time.
Wow.
And that was it. And that's what started all of these. And so that's what I did for 3 or 4 years. And I did everybody. And the people who aren't even up there. This young lady wasn't as famous as some of them, but she was the nicest person I ever met. She was so nice to me. When my father came out to visit me after I had I was doing good for a couple of years. She was starring in Will Penny with, who was that great? Heston with the spacesuit in his teeth. Charlton Heston. She was starring with him, and she took my father on a tour of the stage. She was so sweet, and so I sort of had to draw her in an angelic way. I still remember her. She died young of cancer. And so I just did everybody, and then about 3 years later, I got a call from Columbia. This is too long an explanation of how I got started. I got a call from Columbia, the head of Columbia Television, and his name was Paul Junger Witt. And he called me in, and I went to his office, and he said, "We're doing a pilot on a half-hour show, and since television is changing from black and white to color, we thought maybe from the work you've been doing in the trades and your reputation the past few years, you could come up with something that we could put on the front of this pilot to help sell it to the, sponsors, the advertising agencies." And so I sat there, and I started to work my creative thing, which was going into sort of like a trance. Bullshit. There's the head of the studio sitting across from me, and he's saying, "Maybe you could come up with something." I said, "Well, what's the name of the show?" And he said, "Well, it's about a mother and her 5 kids, and they start a rock and roll thing, and they're called the Partridge Family." He said, and he looked at me like, "Is there anything you could?" And I thought to myself, "Please, God, don't ever let this stop." And coming from down south, southern Illinois, going to the University of Illinois, I used to walk through the fields. I used to hunt pheasant once in a while, things like that. I enjoyed stuff. I knew what a partridge looked like. And so I just sort of stopped for a second, and he had an ornate thing on the desk in front of him, this ornate carving. I just said, I don't know, Bill. I'll just draw a family of partridges walking across the screen." And he went back in his swivel chair, and his feet came up, and he put his hand on his forehead, and he said, "God, they said you were fucking great." And that's how I got into television. And I walked out of the office, and I said to myself, "Shirley Jones, a movie star, is doing shit like this?" I said, "Well, I'll go along with it." And that's how I got started in television. And so after television, I got a call from these guys who were making something about mountain people, and somebody called John Boy. And I thought to myself, well, it ain't sexy. So then I remember when I was a kid in grammar school, I remember reading stories of the people in the Smoky Mountains. Their parents used to make their dresses and their pants to go to school out of potato sacks. And I remember that, so I designed and worked on a screen that simulated canvas potato sacks, and with the right color, that orangey kind of tan thing. And so I made the entire opening of the Waltons sort of synonymous with the feeling of potato sacks. Clothes made out of potato sacks. That was my thinking. And that one was successful. And then after that, I was getting calls every day just for different projects. After that, I called from the head of post-production at Columbia, and they said, we've got a show going on tomorrow night on the network, but we forgot to make an opening for it. We forgot to make an opening for it. What can you do for us? And his name was Werner. He was a great guy, such a lovely man. And he says, well, what can you do in one night? We can't go on the air with a big white space or a black space. It's a brand new show. We didn't know we were going to sell it till the last minute. What can you do for us? So I got it together around 11 o'clock at night. We got these things and drew things, you know, the police story thing with the original one with the cop holding his gun and the guy on the motorcycle. And it took me 3 hours, and I drove out to Columbia, and they kept the gates open for me, and I delivered the thing. And they shot it, a few feet of it that night, and it went on the next night on the premiere. And I sent him a bill for $500. I mean, in 1960s, working for 3 hours, $500. I mean, a fortune. I mean, then a salary a year of $5,000, you could live like an American prince. This was 3 hours. And I gave it to them, they put it on the air, and it was perfect. And 2 days later, I went into his office at the studio, and he looked at me, and I said, did it work out all right for you? And he says, yeah. He says, but I'm going to tell you something. He says, you're a wonderful new artist, but you're the worst businessman that ever lived. And he looked at me, it was like an uncle telling me, you had us over such a barrel. You could have had anything. But where I came from, I never knew anybody who made $500. So that's pretty much the way my career went. And then everything changed. And then in the 70s, that was the wild time. And I had access because I was in a perfect situation. I was the top artist. I was the right age. I still had black curly hair. And the world was my oyster. And the 70s, there was no, you couldn't die from anything you did. So you did everything. And you had plenty of money. And the stuff was pretty cheap then. And so the 70s were a party. I can only explain it simply by saying that drawing of Dean I did with a ballpoint pen in 1978. And the pen never stopped moving. So there was nothing to erase or anything like that. But to write my name or to put down a telephone number, it's true, and it's really, really true. My drawings were fine. Tully, Phil Silvers, Tommy Sands, the drawings were nice and tight. You know, because I haven't had one person say, God, how I'd love to throw my arms around that idiot. And look at it, you know. I'm so glad that all that black curly hair is gone. And I don't have to deal with it.
Oh, yeah, no worries. Yeah, it's kind of
Funny, that's sad.
Well, a lot of my life is sad. I'm sure there's a lot of people here who have sadness in their life. I just take out my sadness now and put it into books and write about it and talk about it, and I have no idea where it's going. As far as covering up the fact that I'm sad, I mean, I had it great. You know, I had Frank Sinatra asking me to do favors for him, and if I would please put in the colors. I had the top of the line thing. I had a magical existence, a 1 in a million situation. But nothing lasts forever, and there's ups and there's downs. All I'm trying to do is, I just am learning. Remember the song "Staying Alive"? And they kept repeating it. And I always wondered, what's the guy yelling? I like Vic Damone. I like being able to hold on to her and dance against my cheek and everything. Then somebody screaming, "Staying alive, staying alive." Now all of a sudden I realize that's the whole thing: staying alive and doing what you do. I mean, you know, it's no. So that's it. And so then. Somebody met me and somebody talked to a fellow named Mike Savage, and Mike Savage called me and said, somebody needs a thing in November, a gallery in Laguna. I mean, the last time I was in Laguna was when things were happening. Yeah, well, you know, I can't afford it.
Black curly hair is highly overrated.
Huh? No, it's not. No. So anyway, and he talked to me about the school, and Mike and his colleague came to my apartment, and they said, "Geez, this place is a museum. What a collection!" And then they said, would I come down here? And
Sandy was more than that. When I left there, I knew I'd met somebody that was very special. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. I asked you to come and you were apprehensive. I had to twist your arm and convince you to meet.
Well,
Andrea, where are you, Andrea?
That's because
over here.
my main
Andrea, I said, don't commit. Okay, don't say yes until you meet Andrea. And when you did, then you got sealed the deal.
The reason that I was
accepted.
the reason I was tentative at the time is because my main preoccupation was with refining and making an art form out of my depression. It's true. I was trying to take something that I've had all my life, but I had so many distractions that it didn't kill me as much. When all the distractions started to leave, it set in. So I figured I was going to have to try to do something to combat that. Because depression can finally put you away. It gives you anxiety, it gives you loneliness, nobody wants to be around you. And that's a long drop from winning awards and Emmys and so forth. So that's it's a simple story. So they asked me to come down, and for the last 2 months, preparing and showing them my work and everything, I've been very, very nervous. I've been very, very nervous and uptight. It hasn't all been, it hasn't at all been, oh, I've got a gallery exhibit. I mean, guys like me I've never had gallery exhibits. You know, my stuff was seen by 30 million people. But I always thought it was only coming over my TV set. It wasn't until I went on a hunting trip in Scotland, I was sitting in a pub and bar, that I saw my paintings and drawings for North and South on a television set above the bartender, and I finally realized that my stuff wasn't only coming over my set all these years. Now it was around the world. And that's pretty much my whole story. And I don't know about other people, but I just keep doing all this shit because I'm scared of dying. And I figure, you know, I don't know how much he still loves me or anything like that, but I don't think he's going to knock me off when I got a ballpoint in my hand. Usually happens in what they call it, you know. Anyway, that's it. And I've enjoyed this. I thank you.
Thank you.
So when's the next show?
Well, I got so much stuff. I could just.
When do you want them back?
Shows. Well, I don't know. I got a lot of stuff.
This is action, what I've seen.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of big ones that. Well, Andrea, who put this together so beautifully, I got a feeling from her. She was one of the only people I've ever met in the art world, or in the acting world, or in show business, where I got that immediate feeling that this person knows what they're doing. I trust this person. I had that feeling about a few people who I knew. People like Freddie Fields and his partner, and people like, you know, there's certain people who are pros. You know what they're doing because they suffer a little bit, they care more than most people do, and you don't hear the same stuff. And so I let her take and do whatever she wanted, you know. And then when I came in, and then when I got pictures of the display, and then I said very humbly to myself, put up Robert Morris for a Broadway show a million years ago, and you didn't put up my great Judy Garland. Nothing changes, and you're still looking for control, and you're still wondering, well, where's my thing of Frank? Geez, I better bring down a magazine where I can show somebody I did Frank. It's art. It's, you know, and that's what we all are in one way. Or I'm sure everybody here is involved in art. The only thing about that, and I'll end with this, is that the only thing I was never able to come off of was the fact that on my draft card and every place else, commercial artists, young, 40s, Jewish, Chicago, you can't make a living as an artist, you got to be a lawyer, a commercial artist, because in my family nobody expected, you don't become an artist. You become a dry goods man, you open a retail shop, you go to work for your uncle who's in the business, stuff like that. So when I was downstairs painting and stuff like that, you know, I'm sure my father was very concerned about what kind of an artist I was going to be. But now is the first time, I think, before it's over, I don't know how good you have to be, how good you guys have to be in your things to really say to yourself, I'm an artist, a real one. Not somebody else telling you, but feel like one. Be able to, I don't know, I'd like to be able to do that before I can.
You don't feel that way anymore?
No.
Feel it tonight.
Yeah, feel it tonight.
Feel it
You
tonight.
are. You are.
Feel it tonight.
No, I should. Tonight I feel a little bit more like I would be in an AA meeting standing up saying, why I got into all this trouble and stuff.
You ain't one, ain't nobody one.
Well, thank you. Thank you. But that's rough. That's rough to tell yourself you're a real artist. You know? Anyway, Jesus, it's really nice that you people came here. I mean, it's really. Plus the fact, yesterday, I get a call from an agent who solicited me, who says that you should be back on the big screen. Your type is really mafia and the whole thing. And so they called me yesterday to go to an audition for acting. And just before I started talking to you, we got a telephone call that I got a call back tomorrow for a gig, an acting gig. Now if I could grow my hair back. But thanks a lot.
Woo!
Thank you.
Thank you.